Welcome, everyone, to the Ashen Forge, episode 18. Of course, I am joined, as usual, by Diggs, Legendary Neurotoxin, and Sog, and I am Phantomex. And thank you for joining us for this episode, Managing Risk. We will be talking about risk versus reward. So there are a lot of different ways you could probably take this discussion, and it all depends on context. So I'm just going to throw it out.
We're going to cover them all.
Yeah, I would say, who wants to start?
Yeah.
Someone start. Go for it.
Yeah, I think Sog asked me if I can lead, which I can lead, but everybody jump in when you're ready. So yeah, I was thinking of this. We have an idea for a show for our sister show to talk about author bias or creator bias. And as I was thinking about that, especially in light of the conversations that we're having in the forums, I was thinking it might be fun to talk about risk versus reward, because I hear Stephen talk about this a lot. And when I think of the way I'm hearing that you want to play, Sog, Phantomex especially, more into the farming than what I would typically think of as risk versus reward combat PvP. I'm wondering how much of an issue that is for you. How much are you looking forward? How much importance or focus are you placing on risk versus reward, and how you're hoping to play Ashes of Creation? I
mean, from a farming perspective, I guess it's sort of different. And this is where I guess there's a lot of different ways you could take this. When I think of risk versus reward based off what I want to do, it sort of kind of falls into two boxes, I guess. One would be the actual act of doing the farming. What's the rate of failure? What do I have to do to keep things going? If I don't log on a day, do I have to start all over again? Do I lose things? Sort of that risk versus reward. If I add more, if I try to develop some sort of, fertilizer or something, and does it ruin the crops instead of, what exactly is that risk versus reward? But then the other box would be the component of getting my stuff to someone else. And that would fall, I guess, within the whole PvP. So actually, when I first started thinking about this, I wasn't even really thinking of that part. It was more the actual farming, but it has to then go somewhere. That's where I sort of see risk versus reward. Probably the second box, if I can call it a box, being more important to the overall game than the first. Just because I feel like that PvP aspect will be, I feel like for better or, whether you believe it or not, probably in order for this world, and we've talked about that. Actually, why I was excited to talk about this, we had kind of briefly talked about risk versus reward in an earlier episode, but it's kind of exciting to have a full show about it. Because I still maintain that the majority of the players that they're going to need to make the worlds function like they want are going to be sort of, I guess, what they're called care bears or casual players. Not that hard. I don't believe the hardcore PvPers are who are going to they'll play obviously a big role, but they're in the day-to-day function of the worlds. I don't think they're going to have as much importance as the casual players, which is where I sit in. But that's where when we started talking about risk versus reward, that's sort of the two things that pop in my head.
Mm-hmm. And so, if you're thinking about farming, are you hoping that there will be lots of challenges? So I happen to know you have a garden and you've got cucumbers growing and you got watermelon growing.
I can compare it to the real life thing now.
Yeah. And so are you hoping that it will be very challenging to try and keep those in check so that they don't outgrow your intake or outgrow what you can sell or overgrow your crops? How because when Stephen talks about risk versus reward, he's like, you won't enjoy the game. You can't have any fun unless there's a great amount of risk. And I'm wondering if that's it. When you're talking about farming, I don't know if you're hoping to have a ton of risk going along with your farming.
Well, yeah, he's probably not thinking of my style of play when he says that, but
that's the point.
So yes, I feel like there should be. I don't want mini games, but I feel like there should be some sort of thought, some sort of challenge behind it. Otherwise, I'll be bound to boredom within a month. So, there's a concept called flow, which has been studied within video games, and it's sort of this idea of where your skill meets an optimal challenge, and if that when those two things balance, that's when you're in a state of flow where you're just constantly going. Time flies by. We've all been there, but it takes sort of it takes a balance. So if the risk or the challenge is too low, you're just going to be bored. Now, if I come in and if it's too hard, then I'm just going to quit. So I do, I think there should be some sort of, I don't want it to be a WoW system where you just spam a button until your skill goes to a certain level that you can then do something else. I also don't really want it to be sort of an EverQuest 2 system where you have to be there clicking one of 4 buttons. So you're still clicking a button, but you're having to watch and pick the right one for the icon that pops up.
Oh, I hate QuickTime events. That's whoever.
Initially, that was kind of cool, right? Because
it was ever cool.
I liked the way the crafting system was done in Vanguard, though, because it was genuinely applying your crafting techniques and skills. You could actually get better at the different things. If you were having a lot of problems with the ability to clear mistakes and errors, you invest your skills in problem resolving. And I actually did a lot of that because I hated mistakes ruining my projects. But you could advance your skills in different ways, and the way the mini game played out, you had a lot of choices for how you actually modularly put all of your parts together and attempt to resolve all of the issues that they present to you. I thought it was a great system.
I didn't play Vanguard because as I was about to start playing, the people that I was going to play with started playing WoW, and that was how I started playing World of Warcraft. But in Vanguard, was there risk of totally failing what you were crafting?
Oh yeah.
When you were going to craft something.
But you knew it. If you were trying to do something that was too difficult, you'd know you were trying to do something that was maybe too difficult, and you knew if you didn't bring good quality resources and actually plan for it, you're probably going to just ruin everything. But it was a player knowledge thing. You could know going into it. It wasn't hidden, but it also wasn't like this wiki style thing where everything was just completely laid out and stupid.
And
there was discovery.
Was there critical failure? Like you rolled snake eyes and it all blew up, and
you could.
I don't believe you would generally die or have something completely explode in one single action. Usually, it would take a series of failures to really ruin something.
But could you die as a character if you did it wrong?
I don't remember. That's the one thing I'm not 100%. Maybe at the higher levels. The other thing about it that I thought was nice was with the level of modularity, you weren't limited by recipes. There wasn't, oh, you're a crafter, great. Well, you're going to make staffs of wisdom and daggers of dexterity. No, if you wanted, you could make daggers with wisdom. You could make staffs with strength. They wouldn't be useful. But if you were the first person to make it, you'd have a world first. And you would have been like, hey, nobody's ever going to use a staff with strength on it, but damn it, I made it anyway. Or maybe you are. Maybe you're going to try to roleplay something weird. I can't remember how viable that was.
So my question about risk versus reward and crafting and taking this right on to the topic is, so in Ashes of Creation, let's say you want to be a crafter, or you want to be doing that. If we take this idea that Stephen has, appears to have, of everything has to come with some risk so that you feel the reward, so that it's a meaningful thing that you do, what should the risk of crafting, should you die? Should you be risking your character dying and having to do a corpse run or something, or are you just rolling on whether your materials were turned into something or not? Whether you use an interface to do it or not. In the end, it's there's a probability that what is. and what is the slider on it? So if there's a probability of like you die because it was so bad that you slipped and you fell on your tools and stabbed yourself in the eye, like, you know, like critical failure, it could be something ridiculous like that.
Yeah,
you ruin, and then there's a percentage where you totally ruin your materials and they're unusable forever. And then there's well, you made something, but it totally sucks. And then there's, oh, yes, great, I made something that someone might actually use. Like, this is, imagine that's the extreme of like risk versus reward. Like,
you forgot one.
I am just not sure if I'm going to pull out something vaguely useful.
You forgot the one where you didn't actually source quality materials, and so you risk blowing up your entire foundry and forge system because you're using stuff that's of inferior quality and has other stuff that is explosive in it. So not only do you die, you wreck your entire operation. That's the highest level of risk you could put in a risk-reward thing. I don't think they're going to that extent.
That the risk versus reward mentality permeates everything in the game, including crafting or including farming or including researching in a science node. Like, I researching in a science node and hoping to just contribute to the area sounds like something fun for me, because in my mind, I'm imagining it being kind of casual. Like, I log in my own time, and what I'm doing is affecting a greater cause. So, you know, I've put in the time that I'm useful in that way, and I'm seeing how it matters. And then I just log out and I do what I have to do. But do we think that there needs to that risk versus reward should permeate these things?
I would answer that question with another question, which I would direct to Stephen, which is, is he substituting the terminology risk versus reward with challenge? Because I don't think those two are necessarily the same. I think everything should be challenging, because that's, again, what's going to keep you in this theoretical state of flow and keep you interested and engaged.
The challenge is partially sometimes just a time commitment, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be actions. Like, there's a challenge involved in mastering a craft in Final Fantasy XIV.
When I say challenge, what I mean is something that is right at or above your skill level as a character, as a player, and being able to still have a chance at being successful. So it's challenging. I don't know that necessarily is a time issue, that I just stand around and wait for something to happen.
The challenge in Final Fantasy XIV, where crafting is huge, and almost everyone uses crafted gear at some point, and some people basically all they do is craft. The challenge is playing the economy right and making sure that you have the right resources and getting what you need and finding customers. It's an economic challenge, not a militaristic challenge.
Well, but there's a lot of different ways to challenge, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a huge penalty or a huge risk. I guess that's my point. You can have a challenging aspect to a game, and just because you fail doesn't mean you don't have to necessarily have this huge risk associated with it. I do think, just to kind of, I guess, wrap up with farming. Yeah, I think there should be challenge to it associated with some sort of risk. I would like to see that. That's what I'm going to be doing. So I want to actually have interest in trying to figure out things. I do, some things might take certain special equipment. Maybe that equipment fails and something negative happens. I do think that should exist. Is that the same? Should that be on the same level as, a massive siege? Well, I hope not. If something dies, I hope, I don't lose half my farm. But we don't really know, I guess, really even what the risk necessarily is for like caravans. Like, okay, we don't really know, because I that's the other side to this also that I mentioned is, do I lose everything? Do I lose half of my stuff? Do I lose 25% of my stuff? Because, Sock, something you had mentioned earlier, I think is a very good point to this discussion, is how many people, are sort of casual, don't have a lot of time. And where do you find that balance that there is this risk, but you didn't spend a whole week, an hour, the hour you have every night to play, you finally get to a caravan and you lose 75% of it. I mean, that's just going to make a whole lot of people probably turn around and say, I'm done with this.
I think that's okay for Steven's vision, though. I think that he thinks that if you want to just play for I'm reading into it and I'm not speaking for him or anything, but the message that I get when I listen to him talk is this is a game for people who are really going to play the game. Like, if you're the guy that logs in for an hour or maybe has to get up in the middle of it and just let your character idle, like I might have to do, then maybe the response is, and he doesn't say this when the question comes up. He always says, oh, yeah, we'll make it work for you. Yes, there will be something for those people, too. But I think that in there, I don't get it. Why would you even want to be that kind of player? How do I make that? How do I make room for that people appear to want when I can't imagine anyone even having fun playing like that? Because that's not the kind of player he is. So I think that the answer is, if you want to be that, if you're not going to come back tomorrow and get right back to it and earn back that 75% that you lost, then what were you doing even playing, and why were you anywhere near that caravan to start with? Because this is what the game is. Right.
But is that a fundamental flaw? Sorry, go ahead.
You always get to interrupt me, Phantom. You never talk, and I never let you talk. When I think about the caravan part of and Steven's vision of the caravan part of farming, it seems to me that his expectation would be that the fun part of that would be Phantom building the caravan and building up the caravan and the wagon parts and the NPC defenders in such a way to help ensure that the caravan is successful. So part of the fun and part of the challenge of that is not just finding a caravan, but actually building the components of the caravan so that you can optimize and try and maximize the survivability of your stuff. And hopefully if it is destroyed when you're not with the caravan, that will also incentivize you to join the caravan and help protect it yourself. I think that's his vision. Some of the things that I'm wondering about, again, is like, will you have to play with, will you have to discover things like, as you're talking about in real life, how many watermelon seeds should I put down if I don't want them to encroach on my cucumbers? How much watering do I need to do here? How is taking care of the watermelon different from taking care of the cucumbers, different than taking care of the lettuce? And that's hopefully there's fantasy and racial crops going in there too. When I played my favorite single-player MMORPG, Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning, one of the things I focused on was alchemy. And with that, I was discovering which plants had which properties. And so, one would be advantageous for cold spells or poison spells, or and sometimes you could have, when you're experimenting to see what you get when you add these two things together, it could have explosive results, it could have cursed results, it could just end up as nothing. But part of the fun there was just going through and documenting how everything worked together. And so actually part of the challenge, I guess, was coming up with something that was useful, but also figuring out what was useful, what was damaging, and what was not. So it would be nice to get some level of that.
The more we're talking about this and the more that I'm thinking about it, I just don't think that level of crafting and complexity is, I don't think that it necessarily fits with the design pillars. Like, they want crafted stuff, but that level of the risk versus reward, I think, is pretty much, it's PvP or PvE combat related, and that the idea of, so you could go be a farmer or whatever, you could go do that, but you get no reward, because the reward is combat gear. Right? Not that a combat gear drops from whatever, it all comes from bosses, but the reward in mind in this risk versus reward pillar isn't related to farming, or isn't related to crafting.
Right.
It's related to combat effectiveness and your ability to
defend the siege, defend the caravan, defend the castle.
So,
or attack.
Well, I that was one thing I don't think we did. I was, if we ever have Stephen back on, I did want to actually explore more. The idea, will you need, as you're sieging, will you actually need your crafters up there with you? Maybe not on the front line, but behind you, creating what you need to continue the siege to be successful. And does some sort of risk reward play into that? Are there risks of failure? Do you have to have, the same as if you went into combat and you missed, or someone had a critical against you? Could you still apply that to the people who are making your ladders, to the people, whatever they're making, your catapults?
Right.
And then you're still part of a militaristic endeavor. Like, then being a crafter is just like being a healer.
But that would be like everything,
which is,
right? You need your people cooking for you. You probably, if you're going to get into armor repair, you're going to need armor smiths.
It depends on how deep they would want to take it and how drawn out the fights end up being. But if you need to have such a large force and it takes enough time that you have to cycle out your front line because they need to get their gear repaired and do this like rolling battle where people are falling back to the back line for the crafters to help them, or taking a break to eat or drink, I think that the scale that you need to make that work is huge. And what would be more likely than having people in the background just being crafters is that you have people fighting with a crafting skill, and somebody says in Discord, I just did a phone motion like people have real phones. Somebody says in Discord, hey, my sword's about to break, I'll meet you at this point and we'll do that real quick. And it's almost like an afterthought. It's like not something that you plan on a large scale, like the supply chain and logistics of a siege, in the sense of a real world siege. But that, when you're putting putting an assault force together, you have to have, just like in a WoW guild, you need to have somebody supplying potions to the guild. You need to, it's not at the time, but you have someone making potions in the guild, so you don't have to go buy them from everybody else. You have people gathering the ingredients. You have people crafting armor, and then it happens beforehand and in your own time, in the downtime, but not in the like we're really playing time.
Yeah, I don't think. My understanding is that there will be crafters helping to shore up walls. There's objectives that people are trying to take over, and one could be breaking through the wall. So there would be people trying to patch up the wall, is my understanding. Crafters helping with that. I don't think there will be farmers helping with the siege. I think the health and benefits from food, it seems like that would really be coming from clerics versus food restoring health in my mind. I don't know.
I'm just imagining that those crafting abilities are, we want someone on our team with that sub skill that we don't say, you're the wall guy. Like, we need a wall guy.
No, but I think you might have a wall guy. I don't think you'll have a food guy.
You're not going to have the kettle guy. You're not going to have the guy that operates the big 20-gallon kettle and makes the food for everyone.
No food trucks.
No shoe shiner. Can we have a shoe shiner too?
The battle of shoe shiner. You got to have those.
I hope you do need some level of complexity, because it's not going to be like a WoW raid where you have to pick 10 people and got to leave out the armor because we need the.
It's
wizard.
about player skill PvP and going out there and beating up virtual people and talking about how awesome you are. It's not about being a crafter. I think that if you want to be a successful guild, and this goes back to where Steven's play style is and everything. Like, for him, the fact that he was able to organize it so that he did have the wall people and he did recruit all the right people and everyone did their parts, then he's got this, yes, I accomplished it because I did this massive people management project. But what the game is about is change through PvP.
Well, and part of my question for you, and I'll have to get Nero to weigh in on this as well. I'm not exactly sure where he falls in terms of what he's hoping to get out of Ashes, if he's still particularly interested in Ashes even. Because we're getting a lot of the PvP and what we're hearing about where they're focused on designing the game. We're getting, fairly classic classes, and I was re-listening to the last live stream, and Stephen was very excited that they were able to have their servers stay online for a whole week or 2 weeks and 2,000 people. And, that's going to be great because server stability is going to be great when they launch alpha, that means, which I'm not particularly convinced of. Again, we aren't hearing about nodes, which is one of the things that we're excited about hearing. They aren't talking about crafting, which we seem to be more interested in. We've kind of moved on, I think, to wanting to be in a world, not necessarily play a game. And I think Steven is still kind of focused on game. It's got to be a game. And we're more like, hey, I just want to farm. I don't need to be the hero who's killing everybody and, wow, and look how strong I am. I want to have a role that might not be a military role or a combat role, and I want to be effective in my role. And, I don't necessarily want to take 3 hours to make a 40-man raid in order to protect my city.
And the key then is that to be able to log into the game and have something that you do that is meaningful enough to what's happening around you that there's positive social kickback, right? So that, in a world where you definitely need farmers because they are a producer, fundamental level in the supply chain that lets everybody do everything that they want to do after that, then being a very successful farmer is a prestigious community role. Now, whether you have a title in the game or not, it's still there's that kind of, I'm part of something and people respect me for being a part of something, and this kind of reward, different from I'm getting loot, but if doing that is super risky and maybe at the extreme is that it's just painful to do it, painstaking and terrible, and you you're just as likely to totally fail as you are to succeed, or that in order to farm you have to be fighting off, crows that are actual enemies all the time, and or like that instead of weeding you're running around and you have to fight giant moles that are trying to take away your crop, because that may not be what a farmer wants to do. But I don't necessarily think that the risk versus reward, that pillar, is meant to apply to the producers.
I don't even think it's meant to apply to PvE.
Crafters. But there's supposed to be PvE. There's even instance.
Well, not that there won't be, but I think when he talks about risk versus reward, yeah, it's sort of aimed at the game in general. But I feel like it's probably going to be more accurate to say risk versus reward applies to PvP situations. And again, this idea of challenge applies more towards crafting and PvP.
I think it's just that the game is really about combat. And very much so, and not necessarily in a bad way, but kind of like if you are going to play World of Warcraft, you don't play World of Warcraft and have this. I guess you could believe that you're never going to fight anything, but you're not even allowed to progress in crafting skills unless you do your class quests, which involve killing things. So what you do...
Now, in World of Warcraft, you can... I've played it, of course, the Care Bear Challenge, where you progress without killing anything. You do that by...
There are level lock... There are class quests, well, maybe not anymore, but there used to be, like, at level 40, you couldn't progress your crafting without... If you were a leather worker, you had to complete Nessingard quests and stuff like that.
Then you wouldn't choose leatherworking for your craft. But
World of Warcraft is a great example of this idea of risk versus reward versus challenge, because there really is no risk in World of Warcraft, right? There isn't. There's a challenge. People they go to raids for the challenge, not for the risk versus reward. I mean, there is no risk.
There is no risk. You don't really lose anything of value at all when you die, and the content's not going to go away or change or anything. So it's not like you're going to lose that situation. That's one of the things that I was really hoping for with EverQuest next and Revival, and we're hoping to see with Ashes of Creation and Chronicles of Valyria, is this idea that risk versus reward actually applies to interactions, that you won't have that situation ever again. It is unique. So how you apply risk versus reward or challenge or whatever lens you want to put on the situation, you're only ever going to have that chance at it once. There might be ways to get back to that situation, plus or minus. Like if you're crafting a sword, it's like, okay, I more or less followed the exact same steps and got back to the same point. My skill is a minuscule amount higher maybe than the last time I did it, but otherwise, it's basically, you've more or less gotten a similar situation. But then it comes down to, well, now you've got one sword's less worth of resources to work with. That could have actually mattered. Again, like that's the sort of thing that I feel like WoW and really all static MMOs kind of don't really have a risk, but that really makes it boring. And actually having the risk that we have here is something that makes it, a lot more interesting in general. Makes the gameplay generally unique in every situation.
For some people, it'd probably make it boring, but again, challenge part of it. We're going back. So it seems like a lot of MMOs are sort of come and go. Where we've gotten into sort of the golden age of MMOs, that there isn't a risk. Everything, you start out with Ultima Online and EverQuest, and you die, and there's a penalty, and all these, pretty hard penalties sometimes. That sort of goes away. Now we're going, and with that, subscription models go away. But now we're getting back to subscription, and we're starting to bring back this idea of risk and experience penalty, maybe losing items. Because Ashes of Creation is going to require a lot of players to get it to function like they want. I mean, I keep saying this, but I feel like I've not heard your guys' opinion. I mean, am I on a pillar alone here? I mean, I really truly feel like in order for this game to function in a world change, for players to affect change and change the worlds, to have different server histories, that is going to require a lot of players, and that the bulk of those players will be casual players. They are not going to be PvPers in total. So I feel like this, is it a fatal flaw that there are such risks and rewards, that there are penalties? Is that going to drive people away? I mean, I
think there will be plenty of people interested in playing Ashes of Creation as a PvP game. And I think that there will be plenty of people interested in just fighting and just doing that stuff to keep stuff moving, as long as the combat is fun. I mean, there are plenty of people that are interested in Crowfall, which is really just a combat game, right? I mean, there's some depth to it.
I have a hard time calling that an MMORPG, but
it's a lot of what I kind of see in PlanetSide, honestly.
Or not, it's people are playing it to do the combat stuff, because what you do is you do the wars, right? You do the battles, and there are plenty of, if the combat in Ashes of Creation is fun for people that like PvP combat, there will be plenty of people to make that work. Now,
it's the same risk reward as a battle royale game. Did you win to the last few places and get the reward, or didn't you? Like, that's, I feel like, most of what Crowfall is, and it's just a campaign that takes 6 months to figure out instead of an hour.
But in Ashes of Creation, it'll be ongoing, changing world evolution, and I don't know that it takes that many people, because there are going to be hundreds or thousands of people that want to play. And I'm not even saying that I don't think there need to be tens of thousands, and there won't be that many people live on a server at the same time anyway. The 2,000 people actively playing on a server benchmark that he talked about should be plenty of people.
Here's a question. Are the worlds exactly the same on every server?
What do you mean by that?
Is the map the same?
Yeah, because that's one of the things that Illyria is doing that's a little different, is that the Oceanic server, for example, they've actually made an archipelago with less landmass because they anticipate a lower amount of players. And so I can see how they did that, so that way the amount of people required to run the infrastructure and do all the interesting things that the world needs before, stuff can happen, is going to be a lot smaller. Versus the other servers are going to be a lot larger with the landmass in the area for all of that sort of stuff. And I'm guessing it's not going to be something similar. I'm guessing Ashes of Creation is going to have the same world everywhere. So that's going to be another concern is, are you on a high population or low population server? How many servers are they going to have? Are they going to need multiple servers like that?
It's the same map, but not necessarily the same world, because
fair enough.
It depends on which nodes are being progressed and who's progressing the nodes.
I think they'll look very different very quickly. But I want to get back to risk versus reward and just talk about reward. And that if we boil this down to, like, the key thing that happens is sieges and if we say that primarily the PvP via siege and castle siege is, the majority of what's happening. That there are people doing a variety of other things. But what is the reward other than, feeling like you won? I don't understand. Like, you do all this stuff and you're playing and you're fighting to win, but and then you're just gonna do it again, or
who wins an Eve?
I don't know, but I don't
think anyone actually wins an Eve. I think CCP wins an Eve.
The reward is watching that baby cucumber grow from nothing and
And
taking
it's
it off
more
the vine?
delicious when you grow it on your own.
And I think that's a good question.
But
Ultimately,
is the reward in Steven's mind just a feeling of accomplishment, or is it a concrete virtual item?
Yeah, I think personal goals and personal accomplishments a lot of what it comes down to, and if it's to get a specific item or to get to a certain level, sure. But I feel like part of it is
be trying to get a specific item. Isn't it items are crafted and mostly what you're doing is PvP, unless you just need it to be better.
It might be that everything's crafted, but this one costs 1 million in-game gold or whatever,
or
because of the materials it takes.
Or 8 cucumbers that are the perfect size and shape.
Perfect, pristine cucumbers, tier 5.
They even have like pinstripe, just the perfect.
It's a good question though. How do you keep people motivated? Like what's the carrot? Like humans also, and that they would rather avoid risk than they would rather not lose
be
something.
Rewarded without risk.
Correct.
Yeah.
Than risk more and lose it all. So what do you give them?
So for me, the things that I'm interested in pursuing in Ashes are augments in terms of rewards, is not so much even items, but different horizontal ways to adapt or augment my skills. But what I see as primary rewards is that we're actually building the towns and we're building the cities and we're building, if I want a library, then I'm going to have to build the town up to a city level, and then I'll be able to build a library and hopefully have, if I'm a Vec, I'll have a Vec library instead of an Elf library, and the Elf library is not going to give me the things that I need as a Vec library. So if I want to learn
that's
about
fine
that,
at the beginning, like the feeling of growing your node is great, but as time progresses, it's going to be exponential, like square curve, right? It's going to flatten off, and there's going to be much less of that happening over time. And what's happening is people are going and fighting.
Well, but what I'm saying is, if I personally want a scientific node that's going to have fast travel. If other people on the server, if enough people on the server don't want to have fast travel on the server, then they're going to try and take down the scientific metropolis and have some other type of metropolis so that there's no fast travel on the server. And that becomes the conflict, which the kind of conflict I think Steven is hoping for. And so I'm going to be fighting literally to get back my reward of fast travel.
But that's you and your play style, which is an extreme minority, and the people that will want to play this game are going to be pre-existing guilds coming in that want to compete with other guilds and are going to want to maximize their combat effectiveness, which may be by helping you with your science node. But this is where, and I think it'll put you right where you want to be for the last thing that you wanted to talk, or the next part of this, is that Steven is not talking about a role play world, but is talking about a game that is played, and that the players are these guilds and these PvP actions, where as you being in the world and just playing and having your own headset on and talking to one or two people that and hanging out and role playing as that character, that you could tune all of the other stuff out, but the majority of people playing are trying to min-max sieges and running spreadsheets and making all of the decisions that you make because they're meaningful to how you want to feel when you're playing the game. They're making decisions based on how they're going to crush their enemies. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that I'll let you lead into, unless somebody wants to take this specific thing further. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about that disparity.
No, I didn't want to
between
take too much about it. I find it interesting that, every time we talk about, people ask about role playing and am I going to be able to role play in this game? They say, yeah, we have taverns for that. And that's not, I don't know why the role playing seems to be limited to taverns. Instead of,
that's the same answer as every other thing that people ask. Basically, every other thing that people ask that isn't the primary focus of the game. Well, will we have instance dungeons? Well, will we have PvP WoW style arena? Yeah, we'll have a spot for that. We'll have a place for people like you. It's
yeah.
like,
we won't talk about it, but you'll have to get into the game. You'll have to actually play the game and then see. Yeah.
You get your subscription, and you'll find a place where you can do what you want.
I mean, a lot of times with these games, I almost feel like RPing just comes down to whether or not you're talking about things outside the game and in the real world or not. And if you're, even if you're not like in character using your specific lines and whatnot, but, you're just keeping the context of everything to the game, you're pretty much role playing.
Right.
As far as I'm concerned.
Right. But that's what I consider role playing in an MMORPG, which is why it's always surprising when the answer is, well, that'll be done in a tavern. What?
But why? And then outside the tavern, just all sorts of political, left, right rabble, and it's.
Or it's all.
No, I hope not.
It's how I'm going to crush the castle, or we need, 50 mages.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't understand.
But I think that in a complex siege, caravan, castle siege driven PvP environment that is conducive to large guilds, that where it is, where I draw the line for role playing is that it's a difference between making decisions for your character or making decisions because you want to beat the game. Right. Or beat the whatever challenge it is in the game, and sacrificing any kind of in-game identity to the victory. Right. So, like I mentioned, as we were just talking before, that often in World of Warcraft, even now, people just log into the game and hang out kind of as they're not hardcore role playing, but kind of hanging out as their characters and just being that person that's goofy in this sort of way in the town, and this stuff happens, has been happening for more than 10 years in World of Warcraft. You're the guy who takes off all his armor and dances on top of the mailbox and blows kisses to people. Yeah, okay. And people hang out and clap and do silly dances and stuff, and that happens. But when it comes down to playing the game, to doing actions in the game beyond the hang out in a tavern, basically, which is what Stevens is like, oh yeah, that's just for hangout time. You could go to the tavern, but playing the game, then all of a sudden you're not the guy that goofs off in the tavern. You are double checking your spreadsheet, and in Rift, I was expected as a rogue because you could basically do any, depending on which kind of rogue you were, and you could switch your class kind of to do different roles and different fights. And I had an idea of the character that I wanted to play, but when it came down to it, and when we're raiding, nope, in different fights, I was told that I needed to spec as something else, just like Diggs's Neverwinter Frost Mage. If you want to have somebody that does frost stuff, I'm your guy. But if you want me to be like any other mage who do you think you're talking to?
Right. I'm not a repel wizard. I'm a frost wizard. Don't tell me to push somebody off a cliff. Sorry, not me.
I feel like there has to be more behind that answer about we have taverns. I mean,
I don't think that it's specifically a tavern. It's what he means is, well, when you're hanging out and not actually playing the game, you can do this role play thing all you want.
I feel like, or at least I hope that there's more to it behind it than even that maybe somehow taverns give you a bonus. I don't know. So I would hope that it wouldn't be, you
so you're role playing in a tavern so that you could get a combat buff.
Yeah,
I don't know that it'd be a combat. Actually, that was going to be a question to Diggs. As a role player in the context of risk versus reward, how do you see, or does it even apply to role playing?
Well, so for me, I don't play RPGs for risk versus reward. I play them for story. So I don't care anything about risk. I like getting reward. So I'm a chaotic good person. So I like helping people with the skills that I have, whatever my role is. And I like being able to progress my skills so that I'm better at what I do. But I don't really care about the risk, and I don't really care about the reward so much, other than, hey, I helped somebody. But I want something that's going to allow me to keep my progression up so I can pay for my upgrades to armor or gear, since I will need them. If you watch me play Bless Online, I'm just playing through the game and I'm getting rewarded, and cool, I've got money to pay for my wyvern rides and I've got money to pay for the gear I need to get into the dungeon. But I'm not really paying attention to that stuff. I don't care about the reward. If I did not have enough money to pay for my rides or pay for my gear, then I would have an issue with that and be frustrated. But
maybe not.
I don't care about risk versus reward. And so that's the other thing why I'm kind of talking about it with you guys, because, Steven keeps hammering it like, why else would you play? If you're not playing for risk versus reward, there's no fun in the game. Like, I'm looking for other kinds of fun, and I think plenty of people.
I don't understand it, even in the PvP sense. So if you're going to go there's a cost associated with sieging a node, right? So you have to gather resources. So it's like you're betting. So it's like the risk versus reward it's like gambling. It's like betting on yourself, right? So you get a bunch of resources, you get all this stuff. I got X bars of steel. This is 3-1, guys. This is 3-1. Come on, rolling those dice. Except that it's like playing the game. But that's the risk versus reward, right? It's like you're wagering resources on your battle against the enemy is what I think that's the key to that part of the design pillar, that you can't just siege things for free. That it costs you to siege things and then you get paid back. Am I totally wrong here?
I don't think so. Go Phantom. Say what you were thinking.
I still think there's a mixture of words that I think some of this is challenge, not risk versus reward. Even when they talk about it as a pillar.
I don't think that is. I don't think that is, because if they're talking, because PvP is so important that the challenge of PvP, and the reason that a lot of people like PvP is that they're pitting themselves against other people, and their challenge is direct comparison to other players, and there's an innate challenge involved in that, not a tuned challenge like a pure PvE encounter is, where there a lot of work goes into ensuring that it's just difficult enough that people feel good when they accomplish it. And
I'm with you. I agree. I'm talking about all that too. All of that as far as challenge.
But I think that the risk versus reward is not related to that, because in the challenge is a PvP encounter.
Which
And
is
that's
what
not,
most people will be wanting, right? So then how does risk or reward
the risk
factor
is
into
that
that?
you have to pay to start the siege. You have to get you have to do all this resource collection before the siege begins. And that's like the whole thing about you. That's why you need caravans. That's why you need all this stuff. That it's about amassing wealth and laying all of that on the line for in your PvP encounter, right?
And being able to,
so you sack the node, and then for a certain period of time, you can take and destroy houses and take resources, and then it's just about like shoveling.
My question then, though, and I don't know that we have an answer because we're not in Steven's mind, is if players are supposed to care, are players going to care about that part more than they care about the challenge part? If
they don't go get the resources,
or is that just
they
the
can't
buy-in?
play the game, right? The siege game, you can't siege without the resources.
Yeah. And I feel like there's multiple layers of risk with the siege, because part of it is just getting enough, bodies together. Part of it's just getting enough resources together. Part of it's getting all those bodies and resources to the same place at the same time. And then the other part is being able to render the node in an attackable state before you're discovered by scouts and before you start getting flanked, before the siege even begins. So there's like all the risk on that side. But if you actually do succeed, well, hell, you took the place. You took whatever you wanted.
But we're talking about long period. It appears to me from listening and reading that we're talking about lots of people, lots of effort, and a significant amount of time for a large node, at least, to prepare for this, and that you are risking. The risk is that I put a ton of effort into preparing for this one moment, and if I lose, I've wasted all of that time, and now I'm in a worse off position to try to play the game again, right? I'm treating guilds or groups of people that are attacking nodes as the player entity, because that's more of what I fully understand about the game right now. That the entity that the game is designed for is a group of people, not an individual.
I feel like the resources
Well,
would be more important than time. I mean, people waste time in World of Warcraft all the time and fail, and they keep going back. So I think it's more the resources.
But if they were only doing things to allow them to do it. So if people in World of Warcraft had to spend the whole week of playing just to make sure that they could pay the entrance fee into the dungeon to get one shot against a boss, if we're correlating PvE rating to that, then this is what it is. It's spending the whole week to prepare to get one shot, and that's it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that came to mind when you're talking, Sog, is a risk and gambling for me. One of the issues that I foresee having is, and also kind of related to Phantom's losing 75% of his farm, is the notion of building up my node for a specific race, and I'm expecting that to be tied to racial progression and how that city or town is able to help you achieve your racial progression. Since that racial makeup can change each time the node pops to the next level, and then if it does pop to the next level, I might want to have a siege or focus rally as many people of a particular race to change it back to the back to the race I want it to be. That's an interesting kind of gamble and risk too. I've spent weeks or months, however long it takes to work towards progressing this to the next level or next stage, and then come to find out it's not the race I wanted. I put all this effort in and didn't get what I wanted, and then what do I do next, and what do I have to do next in order to get the reward that I'm after?
I think that the gambling aspect of that there's always something on the line when you're doing something. I think that that's the pillar. I think that might be it, that you're always placing a bet. That it's like, we can play a friendly, like, actually, as we're waiting, I was playing friendly games of poker for fake money that don't mean anything, right?
Yeah.
I just like looking at the cards sometimes. But in Ashes of Creation, you can't just look at the cards. You gotta pony up. If you want to see at this table, you bring your stack.
Yeah, and one of the risks is, even from, dragons coming and raising your city or raising your town, or do you have enough people there who's going to be able to prevent it when the dragon arrives? Sometimes that's going to be players running the dragon.
Yes.
So.
Well,
and there's no risk of that. That's all reward.
We have come to the end of our show, so I feel like we could probably talk for another hour, but maybe sometime down the road we'll talk about. Maybe we could even talk about this within the context of Theory Forge Chronicles, but we'll see. So, all right. Anybody? Any last words? No,
I'm good. This has been a good talk here.
We are going to do a giveaway, which we'll put out on Twitter at some point this weekend, which will end in 2 weeks. It's basically just for some shirts. So
Ashes of Creation shirts.
Yep, like this that I'm wearing. Your choice, either the gray or black, but we'll get that out on social media.
I do have to say that I'm loving Nero's shirt. It's really cool since I can read it. But we're all gamers.
Yeah, I got this, I wanted to say 3 or 4 years ago from a PlayStation booth at Indiecade.
Yes. But we will get that out, and we, of course, will be back here in 2 weeks. And if you do have an interest in Chronicles of Valyria, we will be here in 1 week with Theory Forge Chronicles. So thank you, everyone, for either watching us live or listening to us later, and we will see you all later.
Yeah. Adios.